Before we begin, find a comfortable place to settle in. You might be sitting in your favourite chair or lying back in bed, letting the day slowly drift away. Allow your arms to rest wherever they naturally fall, by your sides, across your lap, or gently folded, without needing to move them again. Close your eyes if you wish, and take a slow, deep breath in, then let it out gently. Feel your breathing settle into a steady, unhurried rhythm. With each exhale, notice your shoulders loosening, your jaw softening, and the weight of your body sinking deeper into the cushions or mattress beneath you. Imagine the soft pitter-patter of rain against the window, steady, unhurried, and soothing. If you enjoy this relaxed reading, share a memory of your first umbrella, or your most memorable use of one, in the comment. And if you'd like more stories told in this calm way, please like and subscribe. Shelter in the Storm, the human journey behind the umbrella. In this story, we'll trace the umbrella's hidden journey, beginning with palm leaves shading Egyptian rulers, moving through early collapsible oil paper forms in China, and reaching the steel-ribbed frames of Victorian England that finally made them practical against rain. How did something once lifted only above kings and queens become the everyday tool you tuck into a bag? Along the way, you'll meet artisans, inventors, and quiet rebels whose small choices reshaped its purpose, one careful step at a time. And it all begins with shade itself, not as comfort, but as a sign of power. Shade as status. Shade as status began long before umbrellas were used against rain. In the earliest cities, a canopy overhead was less about comfort and more about hierarchy. Reliefs and tomb art depict Egyptian queens beneath palm frond sunshades, the tall poles hoisted by attendants as they walked through blazing courtyards. These shades were heavy, awkward to carry, and that was the point. They required visible labour to preserve the cool space of one figure, while everyone else stood bareheaded under the same desert sun. Shade was a public signal of rank, not private comfort. In Mesopotamia, the pattern sharpened. Stone carvings from Babylon show rulers under broad canopies, drawn like flat roofs suspended over the royal head. Soldiers and labourers beside them stand in open light, holding nothing but tools or weapons. The difference did not need words. A canopy separated the ruler from the crowd, turning shelter into a symbol of power that was instantly recognisable in public ceremonies. Persia added its own form of display. Chariots carried tall staffs with fabric parasols that trailed in the wind, visible even in the chaos of battle. Keeping such a canopy steady while the ground shook beneath the wheels was not about comfort for the rider. It was deliberate spectacle, the ruler framed almost as a divine figure with shade as his constant companion. Like a crown or a throne, the parasol served as a mark of legitimacy, shown clearly enough for all to see. These images appeared most often in processions and public rituals. That mattered. When shade was displayed before crowds, it also revealed a small possibility about its use. A canopy could move. It could be lifted, shifted, and carried from one place to another. Even if ordinary people had no access to such finery, the act of watching it in motion created a quiet model for something more practical. For the majority of people, shade still came only from the landscape itself. A farmer worked under fig branches when he could. the potter leaned against a wall for brief relief. But with each royal display, the contrast became more vivid. The sight reminded everyone of what they lacked, even as it offered an unintentional lesson. Overhead shelter could accompany a person. It did not have to stay tied to palaces alone. The earliest umbrellas were not designed to last. Wood frames splintered, and fabrics faded quickly under sun. Yet durability was never the concern. Their main function was ceremonial, unfolding not to protect against elements, but to broadcast power. Each time one opened, it reenacted the distance between ruler and subject, as if shading one figure for a moment could reinforce an order that defined an entire kingdom. Still, ideas do not remain locked to ceremonies forever. People on the edges of power noticed the form itself. A leaf stretched, a canopy raised, a cloth fixed to a pole. What if such shapes could appear in smaller, humbler ways? These questions did not come loudly, but through small acts of imagination, each attempt less about rank and more about survival in ordinary life. Across Egypt, Babylon and Persia, shade carried the same message. Protection was reserved for the powerful, while exposure was the common condition. And yet, by repeating this message in public processions, rulers made another truth visible. Shelter mattered. Even when meant as a symbol, the device itself hinted at its practical potential. That quiet realization would not disappear. It is here that the story shifts from spectacle to improvisation, from the grandeur of palace shade to the small fixes of daily life. Picture a figure outside the procession with no attendants or carved canopy, only a strip of reed or a piece of cloth in hand, trying to build something of their own. The First Ingenious Fix. The First Ingenious Fix was never a grand design, but a simple act of need. A servant in the sun wove reeds into a mat, tied it to a branch, and found that for a moment it gave shade. A mother held a basket above her child during sudden rain, the weave dripping but slowing the drops. A traveller stretched animal hide over sticks to shield himself and his goods, a clumsy roof that still sent water sliding off the sides. A scholar tipped cloth across his scrolls, propping it just high enough to save ink from smudge. A street performer trimmed canvas onto slender poles, so his music did not stop when drizzle cleared the square. Each of these moments was brief, but together they showed a pattern. Ordinary people bending what they had into shelter. These weren't tools kept in households, carefully built for years. They were quick fixes, fragile and temporary, yet each one proved a point. A mat, a basket, a hide or cloth could carry weight beyond its usual duty. Each time someone tried, they added to a quiet memory of what worked and what failed. Most of these early fixes left no record. They came and went without names attached, and few materials lasted long enough for archaeologists to uncover them. The fragments we do have, reeds collapsed from water, scraps of cloth hardened with wear, hints of animal hide, suggest recurring practices rather than one invention. Across cultures, people reached again and again for what was nearby, flipping baskets into shields, pulling fabric over precious things, or lifting poles to hold shade higher. The repetition mattered more than any single attempt. What grew from this repetition was incremental knowledge. People noticed reeds snapped when wet, but leather endured longer. They discovered cloth kept scrolls dry if angled, but sagged quickly under heavy drops. Every observation became another layer of shared memory, small bits of experience carried into the choices of the next generation. That is how invention often begins, not as a sudden leap, but as a trail of hesitant tests, repeated and refined until the shape of a tool emerges. It's easy to forget that invention isn't only the domain of rulers or named artisans. These first fixes belong to ordinary hands responding to weather in quiet moments. They were acts of survival, guided less by vision than by need. A mother's instinct, a scholar's worry, a performer's livelihood, each gave birth to a shape we still recognize. Though clumsy and brief, they were the first steps toward turning shade into a tool everyone could carry. The power of these fixes wasn't perfection, but persistence. Failures taught as much as small successes. Trial by repetition slowly pressed the idea outward that protection could be portable, that shelter did not need to wait for a building or a palace canopy. With every mat, hide and cloth turned upward, the possibility of a true umbrella grew closer. Those everyday improvisations provided the ideas artisans would eventually refine, shaping frames, seeking lighter materials, testing durability, and it was in a different place, far from those first unrecorded gestures, that materials and craft aligned for something new. Some solutions remained too fragile to last. Others hinted at designs waiting to be perfected. But in one case, the experiment moved beyond makeshift practice and into technical skill. This next step would ask a harder question. How do you take something as fragile as paper and make it resist the weather? China's paper revolution. In China, the story of the umbrella shifted when craft met materials in a new way. Artisans discovered that paper, a substance easily ruined by rain, could be turned into a shield. They brushed it with tung oil, also called Chinawood oil, until its fibres hardened and locked together. What once wilted with a touch of water now shed droplets cleanly, darkened to a rich tone that held firm through storms. Paper in Chinese hands was never just for writing. It was a flexible medium as well suited for tools as for texts. And when paired with bamboo, it found its perfect partner. Bamboo ribs were light but strong, easy to split into slivers, fine enough to bend yet sturdy enough to hold shape. Fixed in a circle, they became a hidden framework beneath the oiled paper, lifting it like a roof above the head. Waterproofing gave the canopy strength, while bamboo gave it structure. Together, these elements formed a tool that was both practical and elegant. The challenge lay in precision. Paper soaks water fast, and coating it unevenly left weak points that storms destroyed. To make it last, each layer of tung oil dried for days before another was added. Families taught apprentices to inspect thin spots against the light, to stretch edges flat so the fibres didn't warp, and to judge the exact moment another coat could safely seal it. This was not a quick invention. It was slow learning, polished by countless hands across generations until the method passed firmly into tradition. Early Chinese umbrellas carried one more difference. They could fold. Chinese records and archaeological finds point to articulated, closable joints centuries before similar devices became common in Europe. A wooden or bamboo frame, tied carefully to a sliding ring, opened wide at need and collapsed down when skies cleared. Instead of lugging a heavy fixed frame or leaving hides to drip by a fire, someone could simply pull the canopy closed and tuck it aside. It was an early glimpse of the portability we take for granted now. Imagine an imperial procession, the emperor moving slowly among guards and banners. Overhead, painted paper umbrellas sway with steady hands, decorated in bursts of clouds, cranes, or calligraphy. Their colour brightens the grey of sudden rain, but their strength is more than symbolic. They fold back as streets narrow, open again as crowds cheer, and serve both as display and as work in protection. For the first time, shade and shelter were united in a single object that moved easily with the user. These umbrellas marked a turning point. Unlike parasols meant only for shade, Chinese oil paper umbrellas were tools against both sun and rain. They crossed the boundary between ceremony and daily life. Carrying one showed taste, but also offered simple relief. In paintings, they appear bright against wet skies. In writings, they are described as elegant companions in sudden downpours. Beauty and function were no longer separate. Bamboo ribs and tung oil-coated paper define their strength, but decoration gave them meaning. The canopy became a canvas, painted with dragons chasing clouds, blossoms scattered across pale backgrounds, or lines of poetry circling outward above the user. Opened along a busy street, an umbrella spoke almost as much as clothing did, signalling style, refinement, or household status. A tool for weather was also a carrier of identity. The collapsible joint itself carried quiet importance. Until that change, umbrellas in many societies were little more than fixed canopies, heavy and awkward to bear. In China, the idea crystallized that shelter could appear only when needed and then vanish neatly. It was a modest mechanical shift, but its impact was deep. That design choice created a rhythm of use that shaped every umbrella to come. Trade and cultural exchange carried these ideas outward. Alongside silk, porcelain, and paper itself, the image of a folding, waterproof umbrella travelled the routes that linked China to the wider world. No single road explains its spread, but goods and methods moved, and with them traces of this invention. Later versions adapted in foreign workshops still echoed the combination of bamboo structure, oiled surface, and the quiet ingenuity of collapsible design. More than 2,000 years ago, these umbrellas were already practical, portable, and expressive. They transformed protection once reserved for rulers into something anyone might carry through town. They showed that everyday shelter could be lasting, compact, and beautiful at the same time. By solving paper's fragility, Chinese artisans set a pattern still visible in the tool we unfold today. But adoption was not smooth everywhere. When the idea reached Europe much later, it faced skepticism rather than admiration. In some streets, the umbrella was not praised, but mocked. Ridicule and Persistence. Imagine carrying a simple umbrella through the streets and being met not with nods of approval, but with snickers and shouted insults. That was the everyday reality in mid-18th century London. At the time, the umbrella's appearance unsettled social expectations. Most men viewed it as a dainty prop for women of high rank, more fashion accessory than weather tool. To carry one in public seemed unmanly, almost laughable. Rain was something men were expected to face, with stout coats and wide-brimmed hats. Anything else felt unnecessary, even vain. This reaction had roots in older associations. Across Europe, shade had long been linked with aristocracy. Parasols appeared in gardens and processions, carried by wealthy women and courtiers. They were ornamental, delicate, fit for display, not for storms. Against that backdrop, the sight of an ordinary Londoner lifting a folding canopy over his head looked eccentric, and for a man it seemed improper. The result was sharp ridicule on the street. whispered judgments in coffee houses, and the sense that umbrellas belonged firmly outside everyday male life. Yet into this climate walked Jonas Hanway. He was a writer and philanthropist, widely travelled, and one of the first men in London to adopt the umbrella as a daily tool. In the damp cobbled streets he appeared again and again with its curved canopy open. Imagine him pausing at a crossing, water cascading off the ribs while others hunched and dripping hurried past. Instead of admiring his foresight, bystanders mocked. Boys followed, jeering. Passers-by muttered that he looked pretentious. Some even claimed his choice broke with common decency. Through it all, Hanway did not put his umbrella away. The criticism came in different forms. Some argued umbrellas were unnecessary when carriages could be hired. Paying for transport in the rain was seen as proper, and using a cloth canopy instead looked cheap or laughable. What comforted one man, they suggested, undermined the customs of urban life. Hanway's umbrella blurred the line. Was it a sign of frugality or a threat to the dignity attached to carriage travel? This unease explains why mockery seemed so steady, even passionate. Still, Hanway persisted. Day after day he walked with his umbrella, ignoring laughter and insults. His quiet insistence made the object more visible, and in this case visibility worked in its favour. Neighbours began to see its logic. While their coats grew heavy with water, his papers stayed dry. While others sloshed into shops, leaving puddles behind, he closed his umbrella neatly and walked inside without fuss. Each repeated act weakened the sense of absurdity. Slowly, the jeers softened, replaced by glances of curiosity. It was persistence itself, not argument, that made the new sight familiar. By the late 18th century, the effect was noticeable. What was once a prop limited to noblewomen became, bit by bit, ordinary in male hands. Hanway had not started a trend overnight. Culture rarely changes that way. But his public example stretched boundaries, showing that umbrellas need not be gendered ornaments, nor elite luxuries tied to carriage use. They could simply be useful, and once useful, they could be shared by all. Think of the courage this required. Most of us avoid ridicule when we can, yet Hanway, day after day, was the lone figure holding firm beneath his canopy. His act may seem small now, but at the time it overturned a common assumption about how men should behave. The umbrella, far from signalling weakness, became evidence of practicality. It proved a man could stay dry without surrendering dignity. Over time, this quiet reversal shaped fashion itself. That shift held wider consequences. Acceptance of umbrellas reshaped how people thought about tools once marked as decorative or elite. Something belonging to the few crossed into the lives of clerks, shopkeepers, and labourers. The umbrella left behind its symbolic role and entered the category of everyday needs. Once public resistance weakened, the market expanded. More men bought umbrellas. Demand grew strong enough that makers began experimenting with sturdier frames and better fabrics. The urban landscape gradually changed. Where once London streets showed only women holding ornate parasols, now men too shielded themselves. Office clerks walked under plain canopies. Merchants protected their account books. Even dock workers waiting at riverside in the mist used umbrellas without ridicule. The sight that once drew taunts became an accepted part of daily rhythm. No one laughed when travellers arrived dry with clothes intact and letters unmarred. Out of persistence came a simple social payoff. By century's end, umbrellas were normal for men. Hanway's habit reveals a familiar pattern. New tools often trouble expectations. Early adopters endure mockery, but with steady use, public opinion shifts, resistance breaks, and the design begins to spread. The umbrella followed this path toward democracy of use. No longer a fragile ornament, no longer a signal of aristocratic leisure, but a practical object for common weather. Acceptance opened the way for makers to refine its form. Once ridicule was overcome, the remaining challenge was no longer social, but mechanical. Umbrellas were still heavy, their frames often splintered, and strong winds snapped their ribs with ease. The question emerging in London's damp climate was simple. How could these canopies become stronger, yet lighter, and truly dependable in a storm? Steel bones in the storm. Steel bones answered that challenge. For centuries, umbrella makers had shaped ribs from cane, wood, or whalebone. These were brittle, heavy, and often untrustworthy in stormy weather. Frames splintered, canopies sagged, and the very tool people carried for shelter could collapse at the worst moment. The frustration was clear. Umbrellas offered cover only until the next strong gust revealed their flaws. In damp and crowded cities, this weakness made the umbrella a more fragile accessory than dependable companion. In 1852, that weakness began to change. Samuel Fox, a manufacturer in Sheffield, patented a frame made with thin, tempered steel ribs. Where whalebone bent and cracked, steel flexed and returned to shape. The difference was immediate in the hand, lighter, steadier, and balanced. A person walking into rain no longer carried a clumsy contraption, but a tool that held firm against sudden wind. The umbrella gained a skeleton that matched its purpose. London itself became the proof. Narrow streets funneled gusts strong enough to flip canopies inside out, sending older umbrellas tumbling and broken into gutters. A steel-ribbed frame resisted those shocks. Instead of snapping, its ribs bent with the wind and sprang back. That simple durability transformed how people thought about the umbrella. It was no longer just a fashion or a mark of status. It became something you could trust on a stormy walk home. This change brought another advantage. Steel could be rolled, tempered, and cut to uniform size with industrial precision. Every rib in a frame matched the next. Makers no longer wrestled brittle wood or irregular bone into shape. With metal, umbrellas could be produced in consistent batches, each one nearly identical, each one expected to perform as well as the last. That repeatability meant lower cost, greater access, and the first steps toward umbrellas as a mass-produced necessity. Around the same time, textiles improved too. At the Great Exhibition of 1851, fabrics like alpaca drew notice for their sheen and water resistance. When stretched across Fox's steel frames, such cloths managed both elegance and practicality. The pairing gave umbrellas a look suited to polite society while making them sturdy enough for everyday weather. A single umbrella now combined resilience, portability, and appearance, bridging fashion with function. This was a quiet revolution. Until then, the finest umbrellas had symbolized wealth, silken canopies that looked refined yet failed in steady rain. Steel ribs paired with stronger fabrics erased that divide. The umbrella was reborn as a genuine shelter, not just a social marker. People could now expect it to perform, and when tools prove reliable, they find their way into more hands. Because steel bore strain without bulk, frames slimmed down, handles shortened, weights lightened. and umbrellas no longer felt like equipment for attendants to carry. Clerks tucked them under the arm, farmers looped them over one wrist, and merchants stored them beside ledgers. The awkward luxury became a common article, woven into the daily routines of many occupations. The umbrella had stepped from ceremonial display into ordinary necessity. As demand grew, makers leaned further on steel's consistency. They produced frames faster, with confidence that each rib would match, and each canopy would open true. Repairs became rarer, purchases steadier, and confidence stronger. Streets filled with black canopies after rain, a visible expression of the umbrella's new role. They spread not by spectacle, but by simple utility, until carrying one felt as natural as wearing boots. This shift altered more than craft. It closed a long chapter where umbrellas were questioned, doubted, or mocked. By the late 19th century, the steel frame had fixed the last doubts. With strength and lightness, umbrellas were embraced across class and gender lines. In a few short decades, the object that once symbolized frailty turned into a standard presence, almost invisible in its normality. Fox's invention shows how material change can reshape social meaning. Steel ribs did not add new symbolism, new ritual, or new fashion. They added reliability, and reliability made the rest possible. Wider purchase, everyday use, and cultural acceptance. Ridicule had already faded once utility became visible, and with steel, utility became permanent. By century's end, the umbrella was as much a part of an urban street as stone pavement or gaslight above. But even with strength won, one question lingered. These umbrellas still stood long and straight, awkward to carry when the sky was clear. The canopy would fold, but the frame itself did not shrink. What remained to solve was not how to withstand a storm, but how to travel more lightly when there was no storm at all. The pocket-sized wonder. How small could an umbrella really be? For centuries it stood tall and straight, a full-length object you had to lean against a hallway rack or hold like a walking stick. Even after steel frames made them sturdier, they were still awkward companions. Carrying one through crowded streets meant a constant reminder of its size. As the 20th century approached, a new question emerged. Could an umbrella collapse so neatly that it might hide inside a pocket or handbag? In 1928, a German engineer, Hans Haupt, gave a working answer. He patented a telescopic pocket umbrella, which he named the NURPS, meaning little guy. Its shaft was built of nested metal tubes that slid smoothly into each other. Extended, it behaved like any ordinary umbrella. Slid down, it shrank to half its length, short enough to disappear into a coat or bag. It was the first umbrella designed not only to open and close, but to vanish when skies cleared. Haupt's design became the inspiration for modern pocket umbrellas. The NURP solved a problem ordinary users already felt. Walking into shops, climbing onto buses, or sitting at a cafe, a long-handled umbrella always got in the way. People wanted the protection without the burden. Imagine slipping something into your pocket at the start of the day and forgetting about it until the first raindrop touched your shoulder. The NURPS made that possible. Smallness became not just convenience, but freedom from planning. Did you know portability was one of the great themes of the early 20th century? Heavy radios shrank into handheld sets. Cameras lost their tripods and fit in travel bags. Typewriters lightened for trains and desks. The umbrella's telescopic trick fit right into this rhythm. to fold a tool was to make it modern, a sign that daily life worked more quickly and comfortably than before. At first, the NERP spread quietly through European cities. Commuters noticed its promise. Always ready, always light, men could slip one beside newspapers, and women could hide one in a handbag without rearranging its contents. For city lives, those details mattered. The convenience outweighed tradition. In time, the very idea of an umbrella began to change. It was no longer a statement of fashion. It was a practical shadow waiting silently in a pocket. Designers did not stop there. Later 20th century refinements, including patents, pushed the folding principle further. Mechanisms with more than one hinge appeared, letting ribs and shafts collapse into tighter bundles. The umbrella could now shrink into cases barely longer than a hand. Bradford E. Phillips and others helped popularize these dual-fold systems, which are still the foundation of most collapsible umbrellas today. They allowed small packages that opened wide enough to protect yet folded into bags with ease. The breakthrough was not just that they closed, but that they closed small enough for daily carry. From that refinement grew the umbrella you recognize now. Rows of them appeared in department stores, in corner shops, and later in airports, often in tidy sleeves that made them look more like glasses cases than shields for weather. Their price dropped as production scaled, and once they were affordable, they became routine. Preparedness was no longer the privilege of a few who could invest in sturdy full-length sticks. Now, every traveller, clerk or student could keep shelter waiting close at hand. This transformation carried cultural weight. Once, umbrellas drew notice by their presence, decorated parasols or heavy steel-handled tools you had to display openly. In their pocket-sized form, they drew notice precisely by disappearing. You did not need to announce them. You simply brought one into view at the instant of need. That subtle shift reshaped their meaning. An umbrella became less about style and more about readiness. A quiet item you carried like a watch or a wallet. The shrinking frame echoed something broader in city life. Modern tools, from radios to notebooks, aimed not to impress onlookers but to work silently in the background. Umbrellas joined that list. A compact case resting between papers or tucked beside a purse strap said little about fashion but much about foresight. The object disappeared until necessity called, which in itself was a mark of progress. Over the 20th century, this compact umbrella seeped into nearly every corner of public life. Students carried them in bags, travellers stowed them in suitcases, commuters kept them near wallets and keys. By the late century, the small foldable form had grown so familiar it was almost invisible. Markets overflowed not with the idea itself, for that had stabilised, but with variations in fabric, colour and pattern. Polka dots, stripes, company logos, woven textures. The engineering was fixed. Customization was left to appearance. Notice what had changed. For centuries, the umbrella had demanded a space of its own, whether ceremonial, ornamental, or functional. With the telescopic pocket form, it no longer required that space. It made no claim to public view until summoned. That invisibility mirrored a broader lesson. The most enduring tools are often those that step quietly aside when they are not needed. Reflect a moment on why shrinking one object mattered so deeply. A large umbrella, after all, still kept you dry, but it also demanded attention, forced you to plan or adjust your day around it. If you left it behind because it was too awkward, it failed at its task. By folding, small umbrellas finally aligned with their true purpose, to be present at the exact moment of weather and absent in every other. That alignment is why they became staples rather than ornaments. In this way, two changes define the pocket-sized wonder. Hans Haupt's NURBS showed that a telescopic frame could make an umbrella truly portable. Later refinements ensured that folding went deeper, tighter, and more reliable. Those steps, taken decades apart, solved the mismatch between need and bulk. Out of them came the everyday umbrella we now slip into briefcases, backpacks, and handbags without thought. And yet the umbrella's impact did not stop at solving rain. Once it became so easy to carry and to unfold in seconds, it began to serve new purposes, as a sign, a marker, even a tool far beyond weather. Before long, the quiet pocket umbrella would find itself raised not just against clouds, but against something altogether more human. Umbrellas in spirit and protest. When is an umbrella powerful even when closed? At first the thought seems strange. After all, we picture it expanding, lifting fabric over our heads to keep out the weather. Yet umbrellas have also carried meaning, when still, when folded, or when raised together in places where words alone could not travel. Back in Japan, long before nylon or steel ribs, umbrellas were crafted from bamboo and oiled paper. These were called wagasa. They were not only tools for rain, but also objects of ceremony. Each one took patient hours to make, bamboo split and shaved thin, strung with thread, and wrapped in carefully layered paper. Coating after coating of oil created a surface that shined faintly in the light while resisting water. Their beauty was deliberate, meant to last for festivals as well as for travel. Wagasa appeared often in cultural life. In woodblock prints you'll notice them in quiet snowfalls or carried through narrow lanes of wooden houses. Films and folktales repeat the image. Someone walking slowly beneath blossoms, the circle of painted paper turning a simple step into a frame of elegance. They shaded travellers, but they also shaded theatre performers, dancers and storytellers. Every rib and brushstroke mattered, not only to resist weather, but to signal refinement. In some Japanese traditions, wagasa and other parasols were treated as yorishiro, objects that could attract spirits, and they appeared in festivals and rituals. This made the umbrella more than a cover. It was a vessel in which presence might gather, bridging the physical and the unseen. When leaned against a wall, it suggested pause. When lifted overhead, it could mean reverence or protection. A single tool shaped bamboo and paper into something both useful and spiritual. This symbolic role endured. Wagasa became not just background objects, but markers of mood, memory, and ceremony. Their very shape carried meaning, a circle above the body, a sign of protection and grace. Over generations, they lived in art, performance, and belief, reminders that even ordinary shelter could hold deeper layers of identity. Centuries later, in a very different setting, umbrellas once again carried weight well beyond their frames. In 2014, the streets of Hong Kong filled with student-led protests. For weeks that became months, people gathered in public spaces to call for democratic reform. The air was charged, tense with police presence, and at moments filled with the sting of pepper spray and tear gas. Among the crowds, umbrellas reappeared, not painted or ceremonial, but plain and quick to open in defense. Protesters raised umbrellas to shield their eyes and skin, crouching behind them against bursts of spray. A canopy, that might have sheltered someone on a wet commute now became a barrier in the smoke. Lines of umbrellas formed a wall, their fabric bending under pressure, ribs straining to hold shape. In photographs that travelled worldwide, a forest of dark canopies rose against riot shields. From those images, the world soon learned the phrase umbrella movement. The choice of tool was not accidental. An umbrella was easy to carry, ordinary to own, and fast to use. More importantly, it was non-violent. To hold one aloft said, in a quiet way, that the crowd demanded protection and dignity, not confrontation. In that moment, its meaning shifted from daily accessory to emblem of resistance. The very ordinariness of the umbrella gave the protests their symbol. A simple household object became shorthand for courage. Placed side by side, Wagasa and the protest umbrella form a striking contrast. One belonged to festivals devoted to craft and spirit, carrying slow rhythms of ceremony. The other belonged to street struggle, sudden and harsh, carried not for grace but survival. And yet they share a thread. Each shows how umbrellas absorb the meaning of the moment. Bamboo and oiled paper could draw blessings. Nylon and steel could block chemical spray. Both went beyond weather, carrying human voice into public space. This is the quiet power of such an object. We reach for it in ordinary life. A rainy walk, a windy morning, and rarely pause to notice what we are holding. But history shows that umbrellas are more than ribs and cloth. They can become offerings or shields or quiet signals of who stands together. Passed to a stranger, they mean care. Decorated with blossoms, they mean pride. Raised in a press of smoke, they mean unity against force. Few tools move so easily between the sacred and the political, yet the umbrella has managed it across centuries. That movement is not due to invention alone, but adaptability. Every generation reshaped it to meet its needs, until its frame carried memory as well as shelter. A sunshade on a small village stage, a black canopy in a city square, each is still recognizably the same object. That continuity binds past and present. So today, when we see umbrellas at rest in hallways or tucked inside bags, we can also remember what they have stood for. They are tools of protection, but also flags of memory and belonging. They hold the small weight of everyday weather, and at times the larger weight of belief or protest. Their fabric is thin, yet the meanings stretched across it are durable, and their story is not finished. The uses we attach to umbrellas change with the needs of the age. Just as Wagasa carried spirits and Hong Kong umbrellas carried resistance, our own era asks something different. The next turn in their history may not be only cultural but technical, shaped by questions of energy, materials and sustainability. That ongoing search continues to reinvent how these canopies serve us and where they may go next. The future of shelter. The future of shelter often hides in plain sight. Tools we think of as finished still change with small adjustments, and the umbrella is no exception. What began centuries ago as leaf, cloth and wood now carries traces of carbon fibre, coated fabrics, and even embedded electronics. We might see it as trivial, yet its purpose remains serious, a frame of trust against the everyday weight of sun and storm. One of the clearest improvements has been the windproof canopy. If you've ever watched an umbrella flip inside out during a gust, you remember the helplessness. Makers responded with vented designs, overlapping layers that let air slip through so pressure doesn't build. The fabric still carries the rain down, but the wind no longer rips at the ribs quite so easily. It's a simple addition, yet it transforms the object from a fragile cover into something that feels steady in unpredictable weather. Another change, small on paper but important in practice, is the automatic opening and closing mechanism. Earlier umbrellas demanded fiddling with fasteners and stiff frames, sometimes in the middle of a sudden downpour. Now, a single press unlocks the canopy in seconds. The detail matters most when it is least convenient. Stepping outside a train station as rain starts, one motion brings shelter overhead. The springs and locks are built to repeat thousands of times, showing how reliability becomes part of design. Umbrellas today also answer to sunlight itself. Modern fabrics often receive protective coatings that block ultraviolet radiation. This restores part of the umbrella's earliest purpose, when shade was as important as cover. A worker walking a long shift outdoors, or a parent holding shade over a child, relies on more than a feeling of coolness. It is a quiet guard against harm woven into the surface of the cloth. The effect is simple but carries value where heat and light press hardest. Still, the familiar weakness lingers. Hinges bend, ribs snap. Inexpensive models often last only until the first strong storm. After heavy rain, bins and gutters in a city sometimes fill with broken umbrellas, their frames twisted beyond repair. This cycle of use and discard raises a sharper question. How do we keep shelter in hand without sending more barriers into waste? Some makers now work with recycled polyester, coated papers or bamboo, while others test biodegradable canopies and sturdier joints. The aim is not only to walk home dry, but to do so without adding to piles washed away in the next flood. Innovation has also turned toward energy. Some patio umbrellas integrate thin solar strips into the canopy. Throughout the day they collect light, charging modest batteries that power LEDs or phone charging ports once the sun goes down. At a cafe table or in a garden, shade becomes a source of evening glow, wires pushed aside by the day's own brightness. Here the umbrella is more than a cover. It becomes part of small shared infrastructure. Other experiments concentrate on ease of use in a different way. A few manufacturers add GPS-linked handles that signal a phone if the umbrella is forgotten in a restaurant or commuter bus. It is not a universal feature, but for those who lose umbrellas often, recovery is suddenly simple. From disposable to traceable shows a full swing of meaning. The tool that slipped so easily from memory now leaves its own trail. Each development matches a need of the present. Vented canopies answer the force of urban wind. Automatic frames match the pace of transport and crowds. UV coatings reflect attention to health. Solar canopies extend use from protection into energy. GPS handles respond to habits of loss. What was once one object serving one purpose becomes a cluster of designs, each shaped to fit today's life more closely. There's also space for reflection in these changes. In ancient times, umbrellas signalled honour when raised above a royal head. Today, when a patio umbrella lights itself from sunlight or shields against rays, it carries another type of meaning. Instead of hierarchy, it suggests care of the body, of the shared environment, of resources saved. The values shift, but the gesture remains recognizable, a circle raised overhead to make life more bearable. The path forward looks less like a single invention than a steady layering. Frame materials are tested for flexibility and strength, fabric for both resistance and safe decay, mechanisms for smooth repetition. Umbrellas of the future may not only fold smaller or stand firmer, they may also aim not to outlast the planet they rest upon. Longevity and sustainability walk hand in hand, as if durability belongs not only to objects, but to the surroundings that allow them. When we look at these changes together, the movement is clear. Each improvement, practical or experimental, continues the centuries-long rhythm in which a simple canopy reflects human priorities. That rhythm may feel invisible in daily use, but it persists, finding new ways to balance protection, convenience, and responsibility. And in tracing that rhythm, the umbrella carries us back to its deeper story, how the smallest adjustments across time shape what we hold today. It is this deeper story that matters most. Because the future of shelter is not only about what we design next, but about how each change rests on countless earlier hands. The umbrella you reach for tomorrow will carry more than fabric and ribs. It will carry the quiet memory of fixes, experiments, and stubborn persistence, waiting to unfold above you once again. Closing the canopy. Every umbrella you carry is more than fabric and ribs. It gathers the work of centuries, small fixes by nameless hands, and bold inventions by known ones. Each curve overhead reflects choices made to keep someone dry again and again. What we hold today is the quiet sum of their effort, shaped to meet need as simply as possible. Picture a commuter in a storm. They reach into a bag, press a button, and open a sleek collapsible canopy, unaware of the history standing behind that moment. Shelter itself is a chain of many hands. If you enjoyed this quiet history, share a memory of your first umbrella, or your most memorable use of one, in the comments. And if you'd like more stories told in this calm way, please like and subscribe.